Everyone has a story. I get them to tell it. Welcome to the Aron Bender Podcast, conversations with media personalities about their personal and professional lives and journeys. Whether you're listening on your favorite platform, watching on YouTube, or now on DB&A TV on Amazon Fire, Roku, Apple TV, or another streaming service, thank you for finding the show, riding along with me on this adventure. Before we get to my conversation with Silva Harapetian, a little about my story. I'm a widowed dad of two girls who just lost their mom, a grieving husband, a man in recovery trying to reconnect with the world with fresh eyes, faith, and perspective, a college journalism professor, a white guy in a world of injustice, a 20-year broadcast media veteran who had his dream job and then lost it. A year and a half ago, God gave me a gift, an opportunity to stop, step back, and breathe so I can learn about love, vulnerability, forgiveness, grace, self-care, patience, and understanding. Silva Harapetian was born in Iran. Her family fled that country for Germany when she was 12 and a few years later moved to the United States. I've known Silva for 20 years now. We work together at KMPH NewsRadio in Fresno. She's since worked in several markets, including Austin, Detroit, and Miami. In this episode, we talk about the importance of mental health and self-care, especially as a journalist, a woman, a person of color. We talk about life in war-torn Iran, adjusting to a relatively brief stay in Germany, navigating life in the U.S. as the oldest child in an immigrant family, and how she adjusted not just during the pandemic, but when her life was forced to change in 2018.
You know, just like a lot of people, COVID has impacted my life as well. You know, I was doing a lot of consulting and production work for clients in Miami, New York when COVID happened. I happened to come back to California because my family's here in California. My sisters are here, my nieces are here. I came home for the holidays and I happened to pick up a client that I was going to work with in that January that led into February. And then that's when everything happened, end of February, beginning of March. So when that happened, I just couldn't leave my parents because of the circumstances. And it didn't make any sense for me to be locked down by myself in Miami. And a lot of my work, a lot of the production work that I was doing sort of came to a halt. So with all those contracts sort of coming to a stop or going on hold, I just decided to stay in California. And I'm really glad I did because there was just a lot happening here, you know, a lot of deciphering of information and helping my sister, just like a lot of people who've had to work at home, turn their living rooms into classrooms and have had to sort of pivot and adjust. So have I, and so has my family. And as I was going through that, I began to have a lot of conversations with people who were struggling with loss, who were struggling with depression, who were struggling with, pivoting in their business. And I thought, well, here I am. I'm one of those people. What can I do to sort of help other people work through these issues? So from this room right here, I started a show, a conversations with people who were valuable to me in my Rolodex, and they were my friends and experts that I had, I'd kept in touch with over the years. So I started producing content, 20, 30, 40-minute conversations about mental health, about how to grieve, about how to pivot in your business, about how to use a digital landscape to pivot what you're doing and going from brick and mortar to making changes. So, so far I've, I think, produced, about 30 shows or so. And it's been really great because not only has it sort of fed my soul and allowed me to stay connected with a lot of people, but it's also helped a lot of people sort of, absorb some of that information, have some of those conversations, with their spouses and their families. So it's been really a labor of love, honestly. And the show was so popular, it actually got picked up by a local radio station, that broadcasts globally, actually, to the Iranian Armenian community. I talk a lot about the issues within the community and inclusion, equity, and equality with the BLM movement and all of the injustice that we saw. So it's just created the space for us to have a lot of really tough and important conversations.
A lot of people.
That's what I'm doing in a nutshell at the moment.
A lot of people, they were hit especially hard by the pandemic because they've never had to kind of navigate things on their own. They've always had either a boss or a roadmap. But of course, with the pandemic, there is no roadmap.
Yeah.
It's never happened in our lifetimes.
Right.
From what experiences in your life have you drawn that drive to be okay with the pivot?
I think that's a really sort of layered question, and obviously you're really good at what you do, otherwise you wouldn't be asking it. But I'll just go with the thing that comes to mind, and that is, as a journalist, right, you are constantly in pivot mode. This is just what you do on a daily basis. So as a television journalist, and I spent 22 years working in television and many more before that in radio with you, you can start out your day doing one thing and thinking this is what the day is going to look like, and by hour 8 you've pivoted 100 times. Your story's changed 100 times, your interviews have canceled about a dozen times, your location has changed multiple times. So that is a skill and a muscle that I think I am fortunate to have developed in this business, because you get very good at assessing the situation and figuring out what your goal is and what you have and what you need in order to meet that goal. And you become very scrappy and very resourceful because you have a deadline to meet, right? So that is a skill and a muscle that I've come to really appreciate, particularly during the pandemic, because I didn't realize how important that was and how naturally I did that, right, on a daily basis, but it also applies to life. But just going back, I don't think I would have been so great at it as a journalist if I didn't have some practice in life, right? So in life, and where I come from, at the age of 12, we left everything behind, family, friends, everything we owned, and we left Iran carrying a suitcase. So when you are at that tender age of a place where you are impressionable and everything makes an impact, and you have to pivot and you have a life-changing experience like that, it prepares you differently for life. I've realized I am not attached to things. I am not attached to places. I am not attached to anything that is in the physical world. And that's just because of my own life experience as a 12-year-old, having to leave everything behind and having to let go because I didn't have any other choice. And then immigrating into Germany and then experiencing that. And just when I was getting settled there, having to let that go. And then having to transition into the United States as a teenager, as a 16-year-old going to high school. I mean, that was an experience. I can spend an hour talking about that. So all of those experiences I think just have prepared me or had prepared me for a life and a career as a journalist. So I feel very fortunate to have had all of those, because I think it made the pandemic and the circumstances of the pandemic a little bit, not easier, but it was manageable for me. I had issues just like everybody else, mentally, and struggled with my mental state, just like everybody else, staying at home, being around family. And I, had been gone for 20 years, living alone for so long, and then coming back and having to manage all of that was very stressful for me. So, but knowing how to pivot, knowing how to create change, and knowing how to manage a circumstance is a skill and a muscle that I think everybody can develop. It's not just something that you have or you're born with. I think you develop that. So if that's something that you're struggling with, there's definitely things that you can do to manage it and be better at it, for sure.
Well, your parents pulled off, the pivot of all pivots, just up and leaving the country they've known. What do you remember about the circumstances that led up to your leaving Iran, and what are some of the memories you have there?
I have some really great memories as a kid, right? I mean, which is odd to say because looking back now, one would not describe those as great memories. It's odd when you're in it and you don't see the alternative. What you have is what you appreciate. And I think that's a really important lesson to remember, particularly in these difficult times, is that what we have is what we have to appreciate, because yes, things could always be better. Things could always, the job could be better, we could be making more, our circumstances could be better, but really paying attention to what you have and what's around you and what you're blessed with is a really important element to the perspective you have when you're dealing with challenging times. I remember the war, right? I remember the 1979 revolution in Iran. I remember the chaos and the unrest in the streets. I remember particularly the anxiety and the fear in the family and in my mother, right? So I may not have been old enough to understand exactly what was going on politically, but I could understand and absorb the fear around this and the collective fear in the community about our safety, right? Particularly since we're Armenian, we're a minority in the country. And it is, at the time, it was significantly changing. Circumstances were changing for us, right? So our freedoms were no longer ours, right? We did, all of that just got kind of taken away. So I remember for years living in fear. And then subsequent to the revolution, there was the Iran-Iraq war that lasted close to 10 years, and 8 of which I experienced. And when you think about an 8-year war, you have to realize it isn't just the nightly bombings, right? That you have to survive and you have to live with on a daily basis. You also have to think about all of the sanctions that are in place, all of the food shortages, and all of the, just the daily things that we so take for granted here that, I didn't grow up with, right? I mean, to find a piece of chocolate or a one piece of banana somewhere was a luxury, and that costs hundreds of thousands of riyals. So those are the things that I remember. So, but I also remember having those moments where I played with my friends in our backyard. I remember having those moments where we drove outside of the city and into the country and had moments with family. And so I have childhood memories that are really great, and they're all surrounded with family and friends and moments and experiences I had. But looking back, I think when you think about where you've come from and what you've experienced, and you take this pandemic, yes, it's hard. Yes, it's something that we haven't experienced, but for a lot of us immigrants, right? A lot of us who came from other circumstances or worse circumstances, we talked a lot about where we came from and what we have. And even being sort of locked down, we're still so much more blessed being here than we would have been under those circumstances. And with that said, there was also a lot of triggers, right? A lot of triggers about, when you see people watch the toilet paper thing on TV and they don't realize what this means to a lot of immigrants. So that triggers a lot of fear about shortage, about food shortage, about access, about, so I watched my parents and a lot of other immigrant families kind of go into that mode of being, in the scarcity mindset of trying to do whatever they can to make sure that they have what they need to survive. So
at what point did you feel like you put a finger on that feeling that you felt as a kid, that anxiety, that fear that you picked up from your parents and from your family, but didn't really have a word for until you got older? At what point did you really kind of put a name to that?
Don't know. I don't think it was a one event. I don't think I've ever just kind of woke up and said, oh, this is what that is. I think over the years, things have sort of revealed themselves as I've sort of become more self-aware as I've paid more attention to what's happening internally with myself in different circumstances. I think things begin to make sense more, right? So, I remember, you remember working in that tiny little newsroom at KMPH
Yep.
in Fresno. And I remember at the time we were covering the Kosovo War. I don't know if you remember or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to sit in that corner, and there was a TV mounted right above my head. And I didn't realize how much the impact of the falling bombs and the sound of the bombs really were ingrained in my system until, like, I would be working, and then all of a sudden the TV would be on and there'd be an explosion, and it just like would startle me, right? And
Yeah.
it makes sense to startle anyone, but it would startle me differently. And then there were moments, I remember working in Oklahoma, and I was telling the story to my sister the other day. I used to sleep on the floor in the living room in Oklahoma. Um, I worked crazy hours when I worked in Oklahoma, 17, 18-hour days. And then I used to sleep on the floor right in front of the door. And I couldn't fall asleep anywhere else in the house. And mostly because if anyone's lived in Oklahoma, they are very aware of the thunder and the lightning in Oklahoma. It is extremely beautiful. But for somebody like me, thunder in the middle of the night is like, that's what I grew up with.
It's rocket fire,
It's
right?
rocket fire. And my neurology would literally have me awake like I'd never been sleeping. And there were moments where I like jumped and stood up and was ready to run out the door. And until I was like, oh, I'm somewhere else, right? Until I would process that it's lightning and thunder. So, and I didn't even realize that was happening at the moment. It was much, much later when somebody asked me, what were your living situations in Oklahoma? And I talked about it, and then I realized that's why I did that, because when I was little, we used to, all of us, sleep on the floor in the living room and in front of the door, because when the sirens would go on, you would hear the sirens just like, tornado sirens would go on.
Right.
It would essentially mean enemy plane has entered into the territory and you need to take cover, because we don't know where this is all going to go. So we would literally, as a child, I was like 7, 8, 9 years old, you're up running down the stairs into the basement underneath the staircase, and you hide until you get the all clear, and you come back and you sleep. And that's a daily occurrence, right? So you don't think that there's anything. And the funny thing about all of that is that everybody just kind of goes on with their day the next morning, like nothing happened or nothing is happening, right? So it was just moments like that where I realize, how the fear and the chaos has sort of been sort of ingrained in me. And I think those experiences probably also made me a much better reporter in a newsroom. It's because I know that I can operate at my highest level when I'm in the middle of chaos, which doesn't make sense for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But if it's quiet, I can't really operate that way. In the middle of a newsroom with 5 scanners going and 3 people yelling and me on deadline, that is my zone of genius, because that's sort of what I'm conditioned to with, and that's my normal, which is strange. So I'm working on making that not the normal. That's my own process and my own healing, journey.
And you talk about the idea of mental health, and as the years went on, you learned more about yourself, you became more self-aware, but this is not something that is prevalent in the immigrant community. And I say immigrant community as a blanket because you'd be hard-pressed to find even one community of immigrants that puts an emphasis on mental health and self-care. How is it you got to that point?
Yeah. I mean, I did a really good job of taking care of myself while I was working in news. because I had such a tough schedule. In every city I worked in, I worked ungodly hours. Not only were they long, but they were not normal hours, right? They're not regular hours, like 9 to 5 hours. They're
Right.
like, I'd be at work at 12 o'clock midnight until like 9 o'clock the next morning. There were, middle of the night shifts or early morning shifts. So self-care was an important process for me. And I realized early on that if I did not do that, I would not be able to sustain, and I would not be able to work at the capacity that I worked in, and I would not be able to produce. Like I saw the impact, particularly since I worked in television. You can tell the lens doesn't lie, right? The lens doesn't lie that you're tired. It doesn't lie that you haven't gotten any sleep or that you're running yourself ragged. You really do have to pay attention to that, particularly for me, being an immigrant, English being my fourth language, right? Sounding clean and clear was an important element to me being presentable. You remember this because I went through this in radio. And one of the things I realized is that when I'm tired, I don't perform well. When I'm tired, I don't enunciate my words well. When I'm tired, I'm not fully present. So knowing how I took care of myself impacted my performance. That's something that I really paid attention to. So I consistently worked out. I worked very, very hard and crazy hours, but at the same time, I took care of myself. I worked out, I ate, I slept, I did not party, I did not drink. I did a little bit, but
I'm going to stop you right there. Come on, we all had several drinks on several occasions,
but it wasn't until I actually got a system down,
right,
where I got to know my body and myself and my performance well enough to say, okay, I can stay out late, but I can't drink. I can drink, but I cannot stay out late.
It's one or the other, not both.
It's one or the other.
All three or four things.
You
right.
Can't do all at the same time, and So for me, self-care was important, and of course, mental health has really played a big role in the past, 7-8 years of my life, right? It actually started in Detroit, to be honest, because when I worked in Detroit, everything they say about Detroit is true. The people are incredible. I've made lifelong friends in Detroit. The stories, the subjects in the stories that I covered were incredible, but the stories themselves were horrific, and the pace in which I worked was horrific. So I would cover, I would do 5 packages in a day. I mean, imagine that. And usually, for people to have a perspective on what that means, is that one reporter usually does 1 package, maybe 1.5 package.
Right.
I would do 5 packages, 4 packages, and live in all those shows. And so the pace of how I worked was intense. You add the weather to the mix, and don't laugh, it is real.
I know, it's brutal. It's brutal. I've never been to Detroit, but I've talked with you, I've talked with others. It's especially coming from Los Angeles, coming from California.
And at the time I went from Texas.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the weather it does make an impact. So does the fact that it's gray 7 or 8 months out of the year. So it is impacting your psyche, and you may not realize it, but it is. And then add the intensity of the crime, right? Particularly when I was there was during the economic downturn. It was the auto industry was crashing, the banking industry was crashing, the city government was in shambles, the mayor was involved in some nonsense. I mean, if you want to know, just go read up on it. I mean, I covered all of that. And what all of that does is it creates anxiety and issues in the public, within the community, and people lash out differently. So crime goes up in different ways. And there was a week where I think every single story I covered that week involved the death of a child. And I remember it was towards the end of my 3 years in Detroit, and I remember really having a hard time that week. I remember going to the news director's office and kind of going, I haven't been here this long, but is this normal? is it normal? I've covered the death of a child every single day this week. And it wasn't, I mean, anytime you cover death is bad. A death of a child is worse. But then as a human, when you peel all the layers back and you say, for 22 years, I've been a journalist, I've covered all kinds of things, right? We've covered so much death and destruction. Why this, right? Why is this rubbing me the wrong way? And it wasn't because it was death or it was a child. It was because, as humans, we look for reasons, we look for ways to process what's happening. And I couldn't process what was happening because all of the deaths that week weren't accidents. It wasn't like it was a drive-by. It wasn't like it was a parent was involved in some gang activity or there was drug involvement. It wasn't in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were all at the hands of the people that were supposed to love this child or that were supposed to protect this child. And it was so difficult for me to process that, I just couldn't understand how as human beings we could be like that. And it was so horrific. I remember asking I said, could you please for the next couple of days give me weather, give me
some features, please.
Give me a feature, give me something other than hard news, because I just couldn't. And I didn't also realize the impact of all of that until I left Detroit, because I did cover so much crime and so much just stuff that I could not process, that I ended up taking a year off, not by choice, because I couldn't find another job, but it was blessing in disguise because it helped me process all of that. It took about a year and a half for me to work through some of that. So, as journalists, we cover so much stuff, and my heart and my thoughts are with all of the journalists that are in the streets in the last, several years, covering politics, covering the previous president, covering, all of the Black Lives Matter movement, all of the protests and everything that's been happening, because I know all of my colleagues are carrying some of all of that with them. When you're in the street, you can't disconnect from that. If you disconnect from that, and you are not going to be able to tell a proper story, you have to feel it. You have to embrace the experience that you're having as you're talking to people, because that's the only way you're going to be able to take that information and take that story and present it to the public in a way that the public can absorb it and understand it. So, we are not robots in the street, is what I'm trying to say. And we do actually carry some of that with us. So I found, once I recognized the impact of it, I paid a lot more attention to my mental health, and I paid a lot more attention to how I processed information, and I added other things into my life to try to sort of minimize or manage some of that impact. And you're right, mental health is huge, and it's so important, particularly now. And it is something that is not talked about in the immigrant communities. It's the reason why I actually started the conversations and the show from this bedroom, is because I was talking to my cousin, who happens to be a psychiatrist in Australia, and the things that she was talking about and the people that she was caring for were exactly the same things I was hearing within my community, within my parents, them talking in the living room and their friends and on the phone. And I thought, we need to be able to help the immigrants who are the older generation immigrants, who may not understand what mental health is, how mental health works, how our experiences from the past impact how we feel today, and how they could be triggered subconsciously. We need to help them recognize these things so that they can identify these things within themselves, and then offer them solutions or offer them resources for them to manage some of the issues that they're having. And that's part of the reason why I continue to talk about mental health. I talk about, the importance of talking about it. Really.
No, it's totally important. And it used to be that reporters were expected to be robots.
Yeah.
Don't connect with the story. Don't get emotionally involved. Thankfully that's changed in only relatively recent years. When you had the conversations with your assignment editor or managers about, hey, give me some light stuff for the next couple of days. What was their response?
You know, normally they would understand, but at the same time, I don't know if at the time I understood the impact enough for me to even seek mental health counseling. I just knew that I wasn't okay, and that I knew that I was having a really hard time, and I didn't realize the impact of it and how much of it had really seeped into my system until I left. And I left and did not do news for a year and a half or so. And being away, stepping away from it, is when you see how it has impacted you. So, you know, I think this is the thing that I've been talking about a lot during this pandemic, is that, you know, it's hard, and people have lost jobs, people have lost their livelihoods, people have lost their businesses. But at the same time, there is a blessing in disguise in these situations, is that sometimes we are forced to stop, right? Like, I got laid off from Detroit. It was not my choice. I would have liked to continue to work there. I would have liked to, you know, gotten another job immediately after that, but it was a forced stop. And that forced stop sort of created enough space and distance for me to see things clearly and for me to process things better. And I think we have to have that kind of perspective when we lose things, when things happen to us that is not what we want. We have to look at it as there is a greater purpose, there is a bigger picture that we don't see. And same thing happened to me just recently, you know, with my other job. So it's a forced circumstance, but I realized that it's an opportunity to really take a look and take stock of where I am and where I want to be, and reevaluate my goals. And yes, I have grieved, and yes, I feel lost, just like everybody else does. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that I want to continue doing that. And one of the things that I keep reading about is how many people have decided they're not going to continue go doing what they were doing before. They're
Right.
not going to continue with their careers. They're not going to go back to working the same hours in the same job. So while it's been difficult, I think it's also created an opportunity and space for people to reevaluate their priorities and really look inward and say, who am I really? What do I really want? What do I want my life to be? And what do I want to be known for? What do I want to leave behind, right? And asking those tough questions when you're busy running on the treadmill, all you're thinking about is not really falling off the treadmill. But if the treadmill stops and you can ask those questions and be able to answer those questions, and not perfectly, you know, somewhat have an answer, then you can make a better decision of whether you want to get off the treadmill, or you want to maybe start at a slower pace, or maybe you want to go full force. But the fact that we've had the opportunity to reset is a huge deal, and it comes with a price. I'm not going to deny that, but I think perspective is important here.
Yeah, and just the idea. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here, because as I say in the intro to the podcast, like a year and a half ago, getting fired, it sucked, it hurt, I was upset, but I understood it, and only eventually did I see it as the gift that it was.
Yeah.
It was that gift to step back and breathe and just take that time to reconnect with myself and my family. And yeah, at the time, I didn't know that it was only going to be another year that I would have with my wife. And I was just talking with my therapist this morning. Like I would love, like, one of my biggest regrets is that my wife didn't get to see much of this me, right? Like this, this better me, this more connected and more present. And so, because I don't have her to give that to, I give that to my daughters. I give that to my family. And honestly, I give that to myself, because I spent more than 40 years of my life not really giving any of that love to myself and just not being happy with who I was.
Yeah.
You mentioned.
I just want to stop and acknowledge that being able to sort of be aware of that and being able to talk about it, and also being able to sort of stay in that space of emotion is so commendable. And I honor you for that, because it is so easy, particularly for us as journalists, to just swallow it and
Yeah.
move on to the next thing, because that's what we've been trained to do. But the fact that you're able to sort of articulate that says a lot about you being able to sit with it and recognize it and embrace it. And there is nothing greater than you being able to give that to yourself. And it unfortunately is through loss and tragedy that we find things that takes us closer to our greater purpose. So that's a really great gift that you have, and it's hard, and it hurts. But
I spent a lot of years not letting myself get into this space, and now I can't get out. now I just live here. I just live in
honestly,
this space.
you don't want to get out.
I know, but
I'm going to tell you a story. There was a time, and I remember exactly. You said, "Is there a moment that you remember?" There was a time in Austin. I was working in Austin, and I had just come out of a really toxic and horrible relationship, and I was trying to hold on to my job and my career, and at the same time trying to hold on to myself. Right. I was in such a horrible place. And there was a period of time where I flipped a switch and just felt nothing. I could still do my job and I went about my day, but I don't remember what triggered it. But one morning I woke up it must have been a story I covered. And realized how horrific the story was and how I did not feel anything. And I remember, and I can't remember the circumstances, but I remember making a very conscious decision that I would much rather flip the switch and feel everything than to feel nothing. Because if I feel everything, then I can navigate through it, whether it's my personal life or work, even if it means that I have to feel the pain of this person that I am covering as a story. And if it seeps into my system and I have to take that home with me, I rather feel everything than to feel nothing. So to talk about now you couldn't get into the space and now you've gotten into it and you can't
now I live here. Yeah, now I live here.
You don't want to get out. Like I made a conscious decision not to get out. So yes, I am sensitive and everything is upsetting to me and everything gets under my skin and I feel every story and if you've watched any of my shows and it's on YouTube, I cry with every single guest. So, it is the opposite of what we're supposed to be as television reporters, but but that's truth and that's the reality. And that's what makes us human.
And that's so encouraged now. And you're empowered to do that, to just be yourself and feel what you feel.
Yeah, because you're not a robot. Your own life and your own loss and your own circumstances are what allow you to tell stories about other people, right? And it's what allows you to connect with other people. It allows you to have compassion. And if you turn that part of yourself off, you're not gonna have that. And that's the integral part of being a really great storyteller. And it's probably the reason I didn't get as far in my career as I wanted to, because I wasn't a robot, I'm a real human being and I did feel everything. And I told stories in a very different way because I think feeling your way through things is how you connect with people. So kudos to you for never getting out of the space again.
Yeah, no, I live here now. Now.
So do I. So
we're gonna have some tears then when I come onto the show. We're just,
Yes.
we're you and me just balling, just
Yes.
balling.
Listen, I sit here with this.
I've got these. I don't know how long these have been here,
I'm
but
prepared.
but I just okay. All right, here we go.
Yeah.
Here we
No,
go.
I think you've gone through a very difficult time in life, and the fact that you are able to be productive and be present and be self-aware and be there for the girls and still work, and and it's not perfect, and it's not okay, but and that's not what we're going for. That's not where we're ever that's a destination we're never going to reach. It's
Yeah.
all about progress. I'm not going to lie, I for a significant period of time right here on this bed, I could not get out of it for like 3 or 4 months. But it's all about, I started not measuring myself to where I used to be, right?
Yeah.
I started measuring myself to the day before, right? So if I got up and made the bed, that was progress from yesterday. If I got up and made the bed and made coffee, that was progress from the day before. And I started measuring things that way, progress that way. And eventually, I don't know if you ever get to a place where you go back to who you were. I think the goal is to be a better version of yourself,
Yes.
but you're never going to get there if you don't start. And
Yeah, and also accepting the idea that, okay, today I made the bed and had coffee, and if tomorrow I only make the bed, that's okay too. And
yeah,
if the next day I don't feel like doing any of those things because I'm just not in the right headspace, that's okay too. Like
yeah,
the idea of being okay with not being okay
yeah,
is huge, and I think that for many people is the first step toward just being okay, being yourself, whatever that looks like that day, not
yeah,
even that day, that moment or that hour, whatever that looks like, that's okay.
yeah. And I think it's, I think social media is really difficult, makes it very difficult for people to be where they are and be okay with it, because this comparison factor comes into play. You're seeing everybody else doing all these things and you're wondering, well, I just got out of bed today, but the reality of the matter is you have to measure yourself against yourself, and you have to measure yourself against what you have a capacity for that particular day, and realizing that all those people you see and you're comparing yourself to have an entire team. They have past
Right.
pictures, they have highlight reels, and they may be in bed themselves that particular day,
Right.
and their
Right.
team
They
is
shot
making it.
all of that stuff in one day, and then
Yeah,
the other 7 days they're, depressed out of their minds, and that's
right.
okay.
And that's
But what
okay.
they're projecting is not that.
Right. And that's the journey that I'm on, is that normalizing the process, right?
Yeah.
So when I ended up, you know, leaving a career I didn't want to leave in 2018 under very difficult circumstances, um, one of the things I wanted to do is give people an idea of what life is like, not the glamorous, amazing news reporter, you're on TV every day. No, I want to show you how I've just lost this career and I'm pivoting to a whole new career. And no, it's not fun. No, it's not rosy. No, it's not perfect. I get, I do work for clients and they don't pay. I, have to go through 5 different proposals until I get one. Like, all of that, I wanted to capture the reality of what life is like. And I want to normalize the conversation about, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to talk about the things that are your L's, are your losses. Because as a storyteller, what do? We it, it's we look for those moments, because those moments allow us to also tell the story of perseverance, of the
Yes.
story of resilience, I mean, you yourself, you're a story of survival and perseverance, right? Loss of a job, loss of a wife, it's like here you are, right? So am I. And they don't have to
Yes.
be huge wins. The fact that we're having conversation and we're creating a space to for other people to feel like they have permission to have these conversations. That in itself makes impact, and that in itself is success. So normalizing the losses, normalizing the process, normalizing the imperfections, normalizing the struggle is important, because if it weren't for those things, we would not have the perseverance stories, the resilience stories, the win stories, the success stories. So I think the more people commit to that, the better we're going to be. And stop looking at social media, man. Stop looking at it.
Yeah,
It's
and I think
not
also
real.
touching on the idea of not all these wins have to be huge wins. Managing expectations. Like
Okay.
I've got so much content built up here that I want to put out 3 episodes a week. Let's go, let's go, let's go. I mentally and emotionally I cannot.
Yeah.
There is not enough time in the day or energy in my body and soul to
Yeah.
put that content together the way that it deserves to be put together.
Yep.
And it took me, this was just a couple of weeks ago. It took me back. Like it was just like it knocked me on my ass a little bit, those expectations, because I've got a lot on my plate. Yes, that doesn't mean I have to eat it all at once. That
Right.
doesn't mean that any of it's going to spoil, because honestly, there are only a few super important, got to take care of all the time things on that plate, and it's my daughters, it's myself, and it's Cal State Northridge, teaching at Cal State Northridge. These other projects I have get what's left,
Right.
and I have to be okay with that.
Yeah. It's like
And
you
and
have to know your own capacity.
yeah,
You know.
and I've set up a space with my bosses at these other things, Pasadena now and Santa Clarita Valley Signal, where I've set up, and they've been great. These publishers have been great to just say, give us what you can.
Right.
And that connection, that relationship, that business relationship that goes beyond business, and understanding that we are all people, is you cannot spend enough money or pay me enough money to give that up,
Yeah.
because that's huge.
There's a couple of things, right? It's like you understanding that you have a specific amount of capacity,
Yes.
and that capacity is not constant. That capacity changes depending on the season you're in your life. Just because I had incredible capacity at a season in my life in 2018 and 2017 does not mean I'm going to be able to have the same capacity, that same capacity today, because I'm in a different season in my life now. And it's okay to understand that you do go through seasons in life. You are in a survival healing season in your life. So your capacity of what you have left over to give is going to be very different than, when you had everything like in order in life, right? So it's understanding that it's not just understanding that other people understand that we're human. It's more important for us to understand that we're human.
Yes.
Right? It's
Yes.
like we forget that we're human. And I think this is also a journalistic trait. This is something that I struggle with all the time. And especially when I transitioned from journalism into entrepreneurship, and I was like, what do you mean you can't get this project done in 3 days? This is a 1-day project. I would look at things and people would take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And I was like, no, this is a 1-day project. But that's a 1-day project for me,
Right.
as a journalist working the way I do, which is insane. It is insane. So, I can think of, I can sit here and I can say, oh my God, we're already in May. And gosh, what have I done this year? I feel like I haven't done anything. And then I will list the things that I've actually done. And I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, what I've accomplished in the first 5 months of the year is 3 times more than what a regular person would accomplish in an entire year. So that's an exercise that I have to consistently do for myself in order for me to be like, okay, chill out. So, and understanding, one of the other reasons is like, yeah, I've done the show from this bedroom and that's what I've been working on, but I have these other balls in the air.
Yeah.
And these other projects that I want to do, and these other ideas. If I turn this computer around and you can see my mirror, there's post-it notes all over the mirror here, right? And all of these are ideas and different business silos. I look at it, but if I'm really honest with myself, I have to say I don't have the capacity to show up for those projects the way they need me to be there for them. I don't have the capacity to interact with the public on the level that I need to interact with them in order for these projects to be successful. I don't have the capacity to go sell these projects to sponsors at the moment. I just don't have it at the moment. And being self-aware and knowing that about yourself is a huge deal. It's all about the self-mastery that you have to embrace about life. And when you know that, then you know it, when you are in different seasons, and when you know when to crank the dial up and when to crank the dial down. And you're also okay with that.
Yes.
You know, I am in that season. I don't know when I'll get out of it. I don't know when you'll get out of it, but I know one day I'll wake up and I'll be able to crank that thing to the fullest, and I'll go 100 miles a minute because I'll be at full capacity. But until then, I have to be really forgiving. I have to have self-love. I have to have compassion towards myself, and have to put myself in environments where all of that is nurtured. Anything
Yes.
less than that
Yes.
is not gonna be good for my healing in my process.
Like I have a thought of when the girls go back to school in the fall in August, like about a week after they start going back to school, that's when I'm going to crank it up. That's at least my thought.
Right.
I have already started to accept that maybe I don't, maybe
Yeah.
I won't.
Right.
Maybe it's this summer, maybe it's next spring, and just
Right.
being okay with doing what I can do when I can do it.
Maybe I'm just gonna sleep for a week.
Yes, yes. Thank you, thank you. Okay, drop off. Let's go back. Nap. Let's go.
Maybe that's no. These are really, really important, because I think a lot of people have a lot of trouble, or have been having a lot of trouble with the loss of that they've experienced, particularly in their careers, seeing that impact on their paychecks and their bank accounts. And it's important to have perspective, and it's important to really turn all of that inward and cut out the noise, and think about what's important to you and what do you want to do and how you want to do it. And it's okay not to be okay, but at the same time, talking about mental health, it is also important for you to seek some help. It's important to talk about it. It's important to open up to friends, not the people that you think are going to judge you, but the people who are going to listen, and the people who are maybe in the same boat as you are, because it is in community where you find strength to move forward, where you find strength to be better, where you find strength to keep fighting for another day. And the truth of the matter is, I mean, what I've been going through with my former employer. I'm really not going to talk about it on the show. If anybody's interested, they can go Google my name and find it. All the paperwork is public. But what I have found, that has been a really, really difficult journey for me, because I feel like I spent my entire life working for a career that and I had to make a decision between staying silent or potentially losing my career. And that was a really difficult choice to make. Even after I made it, the process of absorbing that and processing that has been difficult. But one thing I have found is I have found community in that experience, right? Whereas I thought I was the only one going through that experience. I thought I was the only one who was struggling with those choices. I thought I was, when it went public, I mean, I have an entirely new tribe of people who have lived exactly the same experience. And it makes me feel like And anytime I have those moments, I just pick up the phone and call one of them, and they ground me and they help me feel like I haven't lost my mind, and that they settle the doubts in my mind. They give me the strength to continue to fight, and give me the strength to continue to stand up and to continue to be the voice for the, those who have experienced injustice. So it is an important element that I think there's not enough attention being paid to it. If you find yourself in a difficult, challenging circumstance, who you surround yourself with and finding your tribe is a very, very important element to surviving and thriving eventually.
You brought up that English is your fourth language. What are the other three, and what was the timeline there?
Okay, so I was born in Iran to an Armenian family. So at home, I learned to speak Armenian. And then when you go to school in Iran, school is taught in Farsi. So while you might also learn Armenian alongside Farsi, everything, all your subject matter is taught in Farsi. So Armenian at home, Farsi in school. So I went to school until the 5th grade in Iran. And then from there, we transitioned over to Germany. And we were in Germany for 2 years, and I had to go to school in Germany. So I had to learn ein bisschen Deutsch. So I picked up German.
It looks so weird coming out of your mouth. It just doesn't match. That's great. That's great.
Ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch. Yeah, it's kind of a hard language, which did wonders to my English, because by the time I got here, I couldn't say W, I couldn't say the, everything it went from Armenian to Armenian, which is kind of sing-songy and very like romantic, and Farsi, which is even more sing-songy, and then German, which is very, very hard. and here I am learning English and wanting to be a TV journalist. They were like, what? Who are you? What are you? And why? So yeah, it was a process.
What was that culture shock going from Iran to Germany, and then the culture shock Germany to the US? Which was more stark, that difference, and which did you have the easiest time adjusting to and the most difficult?
Okay, if I could give you a visual of the culture shock. Okay, so in Iran, you have censored media, you have 2 channels, and it's always state programming. On Saturday mornings for 2 hours, you have Pink Panther. That's the extent of cartoons for
At least it was a good one. At least it was a good one.
Right.
I mean, yeah, it could have been worse.
And that's because there's no gender element in Pink Panther when you think about it, right?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So there's that, male female thing is not there. So there's none of that.
Certainly wouldn't be Scooby-Doo all up in there with the way Daphne was rolling around.
No. So also coming from war, where, for example, we would maybe be able to have protein like meat maybe once every 2 weeks. And that's because my dad maybe like worked on a car that belonged to some high level colonel that then paid him in barter with like protein. Like that's a kind of like, it wasn't like you could go to the store and buy protein. Bread lines were around the corner and everybody just got one. Like food was rationed, right? And it's limited. So we arrive in Germany, we finally we get placed in a hotel. And I remember going to the supermarket, and all of us, it was my parents and I and my sister and my uncle and my aunt with their youngest daughter also came. So we all left as a family. All of us, I remember us standing in one line in the lunch meat aisle and looking at all of this lunch meat.
Just overwhelmed by abundance.
Overwhelmed by like, what? First of all, wait, all of this is available. And if we wanted to, we could buy all of this all at once? Like, what? So to give you a perspective of the shock, right? And then of course, television, like, and the content, because essentially you were in a bubble when you're in Iran. You don't know what's going on. You're in your neighborhood. A missile can land literally 2 miles away or 3 miles away, and you would know nothing about it because there's no reporting of it. So
Right.
there's no distribution of information. And to be able to see distribution of information and that much information and programming, it was like, what? Right? So I think it was just a really big culture shock from, the freedoms and the availability and access. And, that's the first, experience I had with being away from Iran. It was hard. I mean, it was, I don't think I've ever really talked in depth about how hard that journey has been for me, because you're going to get me there. I took and absorbed the brunt of the change, and I didn't really share it with anybody, right? So I got bullied and beat up and teased in Germany by the girls in the bathroom all the time. And I didn't tell anybody. Like, what am I going to tell my parents who just like gave up their life and everything? Oh, I'm going to go home and complain about being beat up in the bathroom? Like, come on. Like, that just, being old enough to understand and absorb that, but also just feeling very alone in that process, because I was the oldest. I didn't have an older sibling. I didn't have anybody to talk to.
Well, it goes back to the immigrant community idea of just, you gotta swallow it. You don't make waves. You don't speak out like that, because.
And who am I going to speak out to? I don't even, I'm in a culture. I don't know I don't know what the protocols are. I don't know if this is part of the process. I don't know if this is part of growing up. I don't know if this is I don't know. So when you don't know, you just kind of just take it, right? And then fast forward to here, to the States. It wasn't bullying or any of that. In the States, the pressure was figuring my way forward, right? So I got here and I was 16, so I was a sophomore in high school, and I spoke very little English. So having to figure out, what am I going to do after high school? What comes after high school? Wait, what happens in high school, right? Like, I don't know any of this at all. So I remember, and asking, I think this is where my journalistic sort of natural curiosity was born, is because I had to ask a lot of questions in order for me to figure out what I needed to do. I had to ask a lot of questions for me to understand how the college system worked, how you got accepted to college, and what are the things that you need for college? What are the applications? How do you pay for, none of that stuff is in a manual. No one's handing it to you. You figure it out as you go. And in the process, I'll give you a really funny example. I remember I was very active athletically, because I knew that I didn't have the grades to be accepted in any kind of, university. So I also knew that it wasn't just the grades they looked at. They looked at extracurricular activities. They looked at your volunteer stuff. So I did a lot of that other stuff to load my resume of all of the things that I was lacking in the education part, right? So I remember being very active, and I remember the basketball coach, who was also the track and field coach, one day told me, you're involved in a lot of things. You should, and at the time, they used to always call me to go down to the principal's office every time one of my Armenian brothers or sisters in the school got in trouble. And I would then be the translator for the parent.
Oh, jeez.
So they would call me down into the principal's office, and I would have to translate and explain why the kid was in the principal's office to the parent in Armenian. So for some reason, I don't know why, maybe I was just active and they saw something and I was that person. So I had this role of always being called down to the office as the translator. So this coach said, you're pretty involved and you're pretty active and you seem like you have some leadership qualities. You should run. I was like, run where? He was like, you should run for ESL rep. And I was like, what
are you talking about? What is that?
Okay, well, tell me about it, right? Because I didn't want to come across as I didn't know what he was talking about. Tell me about it. You would probably be doing a lot of the same things that you're doing. You're already doing a lot of the, translating, and you're the liaison between. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's cool. But then I had to quietly leave the gym and I had to go figure out, where am I running to?
I still don't know where I'm running.
I still don't know where I'm running to, and how far do I have to run to get to this ESL rep, and where is it located exactly? Is it an office? Is it a building? Is it like? But just contextually speaking, those are the gaps, right? That I had no context, so I was too embarrassed to ask. So then I had to go ask someone who had nothing to do with anything about what that is and how does that work. And eventually I ended up running for that position and was the ESL rep for my high school. But those are the things that I had to learn. So that was the difficulty of, starting over, having to figure everything out from scratch. And also there's this other thing that happens that a lot of people don't talk about. You come here with parents who have left everything behind, who are already in their 30s or 40s or maybe even 50s. And you are then thrown into the education system and you have to adapt to the West if you want to survive.
Yes.
You have to learn their ways. You have to learn how things work in education. You have to learn how things work in corporate America.
Without any guidance from home because they have no experience with that.
And at the same time, you have to navigate all of the landmines they are putting in place for you, because now what you're doing makes no sense over here. What you're doing goes exactly against the grain over here, right? So now you're not only navigating over here, trying to figure things out, but you're also having to figure this out, which becomes a whole other stress element that is not intended and it's not intentional, but it just is because there's a gap.
Through that, did that breed any kind of resentment? Because life in Iran, as difficult as it was, at least you weren't getting bullied in the bathroom, and here your parents are taking you to Germany. The reason you're being picked on and being bullied is because you've moved there. Well, who moved you there? Your parents moved you there. And they've done now the same thing into the United States, putting you in these situations. Any resentment at all, or how did you navigate that?
No, I am forever grateful. I am forever indebted to them, right? Because when you think about it, people always say parents want a better life for their kids and parents give up everything for the kids. I mean, my parents and every other immigrant family you speak with who's gone through similar circumstances have literally given everything up, literally given everything that they have worked for. Imagine you being where you are and leaving everything that you have, just taking your girls, getting on a plane and being literally putting you in another country and telling you to start all over again, right? So as I got older, I understood it more. I mean, I understood it when I was younger, but I think I was really also focused on figuring out how to survive and make a way for myself when I was younger. But as I got older, I had a lot more compassion and understanding for that. No, I'm forever grateful for the sacrifices they've made. In fact, I went into journalism because I thought, how else could I pay back their sacrifice, right?
And totally understanding, by the way, that I'm asking this as a white guy who's never been in the position
Right.
of like, oh, by the way, to survive, you need to uproot your entire family and move to another country.
Right. And I'm not gonna lie, it was really hard. It was really, 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 really hard. And it was really heart-wrenching and hard because at the in because I found myself always at crossroads. In order for me to do this, I had to break my mother's heart over here. In order to do that, I had to go against this over here, right? And it wasn't intentional, it wasn't purposeful. I had this greater hope and this incredible faith that it would all make sense to them at some point, that they didn't see it and they didn't understand it and they couldn't visualize it, but I had the vision and I had an understanding of what I was doing, and I was determined. There was like, failure was not an option. You remember working with me in radio, like it was not an option. You do not get to pull me off the air and have me go, okay, let me try a different job. No. I committed to this. I committed to this with every fiber of my being, and I'm going to see it through, because that is the only way they're going to be able to see what I'm trying to do. And what I was trying to do is, they uprooted us and brought us out of the country so that there would be hope for us. As a woman in Iran, I am a property. There at the time, particularly, there wasn't much option. As you graduated high school, maybe you got to work, maybe you got to go to the university. Even then, it was like there's no opportunity, right? So coming from a country where there's no opportunity for a woman, coming from a country where everything is censored, right? Nobody has the power of voice. Nobody has the power to speak up. Nobody, the inequity and equality between men and women are beyond what I can even describe and explain on this podcast. So for me, the ultimate gift was to do the thing that I could not do if I had stayed behind. And I thought, how could I do that and make the greatest impact, right? I can be a voice. I can be a conduit for those who have experienced injustice, for those who have experienced inequity and equality. And who better to tell those stories than someone who's lived it, right? So I had this big vision in my head that I had to figure out, okay, what do I have to do to get to that? I had to deconstruct the entire process all the way down to getting a job as a writer at a news radio station. And that was the beginning of, okay, one foot in front of the other. Okay, what do I have? What can I get? And what is the next thing that's going to move me forward? And that's been my career in building one thing over the other for the past 22 years. So understanding that maybe puts into context how difficult it was for me to be like, I am no longer going to do this, because in context, this was my life and my greatest gift I could ever give to my parents. But at the same time, I found myself like, this was the whole point. My parents sacrificed everything so that I would have a voice. My parents gave up everything, and I went through all of these challenges to get here so that I would have a voice and I could live in a country where there's equity, equality, and the American dream. Right? And to find myself in a situation where I work for an organization whose responsibility is to hold other people accountable. And now I'm seeing them not hold themselves accountable. Like, I can't go out in the street and ask the next person to put themselves on the line if I can't speak the truth in this circumstance. And so for me, it is a lot bigger and has much more impact and much more meaning in a life circumstance than just a piece of paper and me talking about some inequality and inequity in pay,
And I think it also speaks to the idea that, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, and I know you have as well, we are not our careers. Our careers are not our identities, nor should they be. And you don't need to hold that mic flag just to have a voice, especially now. Maybe 20 years ago, when maybe you could write a column somewhere and maybe it gets read and maybe it gets picked up. But now with all these different platforms, you can be your own voice, your own boss, and decide what content you put out there. You don't have to have a traditional employer.
But there is this other thing. So the challenge with that, I agree with you. And this is part of what I actually teach entrepreneurs how to do. But there is this other thing where as a woman of color, as someone who was obviously and constantly and consistently reminded that I'm a foreigner in this business, right? And in this country, because I look it, I sound it, I move like one, right? So I exude it. I always being labeled that and then being told to tone it down in order for me to fit within the parameters of the TV screen, right?
Right.
The challenge for me has been to embrace all of that about myself in order for me to then create the most authentic content I can create in other platforms. Because for so many years, in order for me to hold the mic flag, I had to put a lid on it, right? I couldn't be too ethnic. I couldn't sound too ethnic. I couldn't, all of those things were said to be distractions, were said to be things that were not that were valued in an organization or a newsroom. And part of me kind of understands that, but at the same time, now that I step back and I look at it and I was like, no, that was racist. Now I know, right? Because I also struggle with this. And why did I not say something sooner? Because this is not the first time I've experienced it. Why did I just turn the other cheek? Why did I let it roll off my back throughout my entire career? Why, if I am this voice for equity, equality, and for women, and this is what my advocacy in my life is about, why didn't I say something? And this comes back to self-love and compassion. And I had to dig a little bit to understand that I just didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know. And I didn't know because guess what? Yes, no matter how much I tried to be American, even with my American passport, I'm still a foreigner. So I don't have a lot of context in a lot of places. Like, I got to this country at 12. So I don't have a lot of context about corporate relationships and corporate behavior. I still have had to figure out and navigate all of that by myself, using my own radar and my own boundaries, which are off, right? I say off in a sense where they're not the same as yours.
Right. Yeah. Somebody else, same age, woman, but grew up in this country from, day one.
Right.
It would be completely, and worked in every same newsroom, worked in every same city, would have been completely different. Completely different.
I didn't understand small nuances,
Yes.
which is why I missed them. I didn't understand those moments and those nuances and the tone and to me, I just looked at it as I'm a foreigner, so I'm just going to work harder. All these other people have 12 years on me, right? I am behind the 8 ball, even if I work 100 times harder than they do. So I just assumed that if I worked hard and if I showed up and did the best, then it should be okay.
Well, that's what we're taught. That's what we're taught from a young age. That's just work hard and you'll get to where you're going.
Right. And all of these other nuances, I didn't know that they are labeled as racism. I didn't know that's what you call inequality and gender discrimination. I didn't understand and know it until I got to then experience it blatantly and fully in my face.
Well,
And
it's like the conversation we've both had with Lori Lizarraga.
yes,
She worked in Denver, and anybody wants to listen to her episode, it's a previous podcast episode here, and also on the Silva Harapetian show. The idea that had she not worked in Bakersfield in a nurturing, empowering environment and newsroom, she may not have recognized that her newsroom in Denver was toxic and
right.
racist and oppressive.
Mm-hmm.
So you need that context. You need that previous experience. Otherwise, how do you know what's going on right now is wrong?
Right. Right.
And conversely, how do you know what's going on is right and healthy? Well, it's because, oh, well, this other way that I lived for so many years was wrong and unhealthy.
Right.
So
and
now,
also this brings it back to the importance of people talking about it, because
Yes.
if people don't talk about it, then you don't have a frame of reference.
Yeah, you feel like you're alone. You feel like it's just in a vacuum. It's only happening to me.
So, I'll
Or it's not even happening at all. I'm just imagining it.
I'm just imagining it, right? So I had one of those aha moments that literally turned my life upside down, which was the beginning of the web series that I ended up developing in 2018. And this was right during and towards sort of the end of the Me Too movement. Like there'd been a lot had been happening. People had been talking. I'd been reading a lot of articles about what it feels like, the power element in abuse and sexual harassment, and what act is associated with what feeling. Like I had been reading a lot of articles about that, and I commend all of those people who came out and talked about it, because when they talked about their experiences, they wrote about it, and I was absorbing all of that information. And I remember doing some stories about it as well. So here I was in the parking lot of the Dolphin Stadium, and I was covering the Orange Bowl, and it was I can't remember who they were playing, but I had been sent to cover the story from the fan perspective, and the assignment desk sent me to park the live truck in a public parking lot where people had been tailgating for like 13 hours before the game. So the game was at like 8, and people had been there since 9 o'clock in the morning, right? So, and I told the assignment editor, I was like, listen, you're asking for disaster, because game starts at 8, it'll probably be over by 11:30, which is when we need to go live, right? And people drunk out of their minds are going to be walking out of the stadium into the parking lot where I'm going to be live. This is just not a good idea. I could not get it through her. And she was adamant about making sure that I was live. I was like, listen, why don't I shoot a look live? No. Hey, listen, this is not going to be safe for me, and it's not going to be safe for my photographer, a live truck. Like I can't guarantee anything. And it's not a good idea. Eventually, she basically bullied me into going live. And I was standing in front of the camera with the lights on, the mic on. I happened to have my work phone in my hand because I was going to read a script. And I had my phone, and I had my IFB in my hand. So my hands were full. Because I was wearing a dress that day and I couldn't hook the IFB anywhere, and it wasn't long enough for me to put it on the ground. So I had to get rid of something in my hand. So I put my phones on the ground, and I was just holding on to the IFB. And as I was getting ready to go live, like maybe like 2 minutes before the live shot, people start coming out. I'm like, geez, this is going to be a problem. So I tell my photographer, I told him, I said, keep your finger on the camera just in case you need to turn it off, just in case somebody, runs up and starts cussing during a live shot.
Yeah. So
this person walks up to me and clearly drunk, stumbling all over the place. Hey, how you doing? I want to be on TV. And I was like, I I am in the middle of something, so I'm going to come back to you in just a second. Anyway, I try to calm them down. I try to have a conversation about, hey, I'll come talk to you. Go stand over there by the car. This is happening within like seconds, right?
Right.
And instead of stepping away, they're stepping closer to me. And now I'm getting a little nervous because the lights are on, my mic is on, my producer's talking in my ear. We're about a minute away. And I hear, girl, can I cuss on this podcast? Yeah. Girl, you got a fat ass. I was like, okay, now this cannot be on television. I'm looking at my photographer and I'm looking at her, and my producer's like, are you okay? I'm like, no, something's happening. And I'm like, I just need you to step away for a little bit. And I promise you, I'm going to take the camera and come and talk to you. Nope. Oh, you have such pretty hair. And then my hair gets touched. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to need you to step away, give me a distance, and step back, step in, and whack on my butt.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, did you just smack me on my ass? And it just so happens this person was a woman, and there was a 10-year-old boy who was watching all of this. And at that moment in time, my producer in my ear goes, okay, 10 seconds away, 9, 8, 7, 6. And I'm just like, I don't know how I got through that live shot. But after I got through that live shot, I remember thinking, I almost laughed at this woman smacking my butt, because I have been conditioned as a journalist to just let it go for the sake of the story. But what I couldn't get rid of was what I was feeling at that moment. And I would not have been able to identify what that feeling was had I not read about all of those other people who had been talking about what it felt like when they were sexually harassed. And at that moment, a light bulb went on in my head. Holy shit, I was just sexually assaulted. Because the feeling that I felt was exactly the feeling all of those women had been describing in all of their articles. I felt powerless. For the first time in my career in 22 years as a journalist, with as many times as people have said things to me sideways, have come at me sideways, have spoken to me inappropriately, on that moment was the moment when I was like, oh my God, this was sexual assault. And I have been sexually harassed my entire career by the public everywhere. And I've let it slide because I didn't know that's what I was feeling, because I didn't know how to articulate it. I didn't know what that feeling was. And when I tell you that I had a meltdown of some proportion, I can't even explain to you. The circumstances in which I ended up having to get home, I had to walk through the crowd for a mile to get to my other photographer to drive me home. The fear and the anxiety that followed me in crowds after that, and continues to follow me in crowds, is almost toxic and unhealthy, but rightfully so. Because at that moment, I had never, ever, ever felt like I was powerless in a situation. With the lights on, the mic on, my phone's on the ground. I did not have a microphone in my hand, which is usually my safety weapon there. And the fact that it was a woman, I did not anticipate it coming from a woman. So that heightened it to a whole other level. I tried to find her. I tried to find security. I tried to find a cop to file charges or report her. couldn't find anybody there. And for the first time in my life, I was able to understand the importance of talking about these circumstances, because if it weren't for those other women talking about it, I wouldn't have known that's what happened to me. And I wouldn't be able to identify it. I wouldn't be able to articulate it. And I certainly wouldn't be able to process it. Right. And I would be walking around with it. I mean, I still do, but in a very different way. So complete meltdown that night, didn't go to work for 3 days, and things have never been the same since. So to minimize your experience, whatever it is that you're feeling, and to think that if you keep quiet, that you are doing someone or something a service, is not true. The more we talk about these things, the more important it is, because you never know who it's impacting and who it's helping. And I'm one of those people who have received and the recipients of the sacrifice of those women who have spoken out. So I commend Lori. That's part of the reason why she was on my podcast. I continue to talk about and create platform for people who want to talk about the difficult things that have happened in their lives, because I think there is so much value in us talking about the things that happen to us, because it makes us feel like we're not alone. It makes me feel like I'm not alone. It makes other people who may not be ready to talk about it feel like they're not alone. And it allows us to actually interpret our experiences in a way that is healthy and is healing, and it allows us to move forward with our lives.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just thank you for you.
That was a lot, but I continue to share that story because what I am most amazed about was my own reaction at that moment. And I shot a video afterwards to document what had happened. And what I find fascinating looking back is that I subconsciously am taking the blame for being assaulted in that video. Mm-hmm. I am taking, in that video, I talk about this is what happened and this is what the woman did. And this is what, oh, by the way, just so you can see, this is what I'm wearing, to show that my clothes were not inviting, right, to that kind of behavior. So somehow, some way, being conditioned that what you wear creates an opportunity and makes you deserving of some act, and looking back at it, I can't stress enough how important it is to continue to talk to young women and professionals in corporate America, in news, in media, in Hollywood, about all of that, because it impacts your psyche, it impacts how you feel about yourself, it impacts your sense of worthiness, it impacts the level of blame that you carry and responsibility as a woman. Somehow I carried the responsibility of other people's bad behavior for decades, and I let it roll off my back and turn the other cheek, because in the name of the story, not realizing the long-term impact that something like that has on a person. And this is why it's so incredibly important to step away from things for a little while, to create space and opportunity to be able to just sit with yourself and see where you need healing and where you need empowerment, and what it is that you need to do in order to feel those things and to fix those things about yourself. So while it was one of the most challenging things that happened to me, and I continue to work on it, it also inspired the 18-part web series that I ended up creating, because what I wanted to do is I wanted to give people a glimpse of what life is like as a reporter. Not the minute-and-a-half polished person you see on television, who, by the way, carried a flawless live shot on that particular day, intro and outro, as like, it blows my mind how I even did that. But
well, we've talked about you thrive in chaos. So
right, exactly. Well, I prefer not to thrive in that kind of chaos, but true. But the importance of just, being able to allow yourself to process all of that information.
Thank you, Silva. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Where can people find you?
Whew, man, you got me talking today. People can find me on Instagram. I am very active on Instagram, Silva Harapetian. It's my handle. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. Give me some love and go watch some of my videos on YouTube. It's my name, Silva Harapetian. I have 20 some odd videos about different topics and every story is inspirational. Every story is important. Every story is, has a significance, and why I spend so much time talking to people. You're gonna have to come on my show.
I look forward to it.
Next. And also keep an eye out for something I'm working on that is going to, it's meant to honor the sacrifices that the underrepresented, underprivileged immigrants, people of color have made in pursuit of the American dream, despite the inequity, despite the inequality, despite the injustice, despite all of those things, how they are the American dream, how they built America. And I want to celebrate all of them, and many of them, by really paying attention and featuring the everyday people that really make an impact in our lives and our communities. So you're the first to know. Breaking news here.
I look forward to it.
I'm working on. I've got some people involved, and I'm really committed to it. I think being someone whose voice has made an impact so far, it changed the way employees are treated in the organization I was working. It changed the tone of that organization. It cleared up the executive offices and replaced multiple people, and seeing that kind of change by using my voice has inspired me to create a platform where other people can be inspired to use theirs, and tell their success stories, and show off their resilience. So
we'll put all those links in the show notes and drive everybody there. Also, silvaharapetian.com. So yes. Love you, Silva. Thank you.
Thank you. So good to see you. I'll see you on my show next time.
Check out silvaharapetian.com. Follow her on Instagram at Silva Harapetian. Of course, all those links are in the show notes. You can follow the Aron Bender podcast on your favorite platforms and link to it at aronbender.com. That's also where you can find all my social media. If you have guest ideas or comments, email me, aronbendermedia@gmail.com. Thanks for listening or watching. Be well.